Over the next 12 weeks, TelecomTV will be taking the most detailed and in-depth look yet at sustainable and environmentally responsible communications solutions, applications, and business models. We'll be looking at what telecoms and IT can do to make this a green planet.
Energy-related CO2 emissions are expected to increase by 45% over the next 20 years. The world is on course to see a doubling of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere by the end of this century, resulting in an average temperature rise across the globe of 6 degrees. The power generation and automotive sectors will contribute over 70% of the projected increase in global energy-related CO2. But the ICT sector is not guilt-free. It's estimated that the industry contributes 2 to 3% of CO2 emissions.
As the ICT industry has grown over time, so its use of electricity and power has grown. In fact, the spread of mobile phones is now in excess of the spread of electricity around the world, which in turn puts pressure on use of base stations, use of recharges in rural areas where there is no electricity. But if you just put all those mobile phones together, some 4 billion mobile phones around the world, all being recharged, all being used, that consumes a huge amount of electricity.
In 2005, data centers in the world use about 1% of all electricity use, and that roughly doubled in the 5 years previous, and it's likely to double again by 2010, 2012.
What's really striking, I think, is not so much today's use of ICT, which probably account for between 2 and 2.5% of the total emissions of greenhouse gases, but rather the future emissions of greenhouse gases from those devices, which is estimated by 2020 to amount to at least 3% of total emissions. That's even taking into account what can be done to reduce those emissions.
Of course, it's not just about climate change. ICT has an impact on energy shortage, energy costs, and energy poverty. Global energy demand is growing by 1.6% per year, and there's no sign of it slowing down. China and India account for over half of this increase, and collectively, non-OECD countries account for 87%. The North American Network Operation Group says that by 2010, almost 50% of the world's data centers will not have enough energy to power and cool them. Energy shortage is also the driving use of alternate and renewable energy, and efficient energy practices will become key. It is also estimated that operational expenditures of a data center over 3 years often exceeds capital investment costs.
Power consumption in data centers is very high. It's typically most people associate data centers with the biggest culprits of power consumption in networks. And building data centers is expensive, but even changing power supplies into individual racks can have a price ticket of as high as $25,000. So by freeing up the space, by collapsing different equipment in a shared infrastructure, all of these things play together, and ultimately, help service providers save money on energy, but also on expansion of their data center.
Another equally important dimension that's often left out in these discussions is energy poverty. Without electricity, there can be no meaningful development, especially in the efforts to reduce the digital gap.
When you get to frontier markets, when you get to the villages in rural Kenya, which are not yet connected by mobile, you will most likely not find reliable energy sources or grid electricity. And so the conventional approach for operators to around that problem is to put in a diesel generator and truck diesel back and forth to the site on a regular basis. And the majority of operators that we've worked with said we would like to find a better solution where we don't have to send trucks, where we don't have to continue to buy large amounts of diesel, and also where we can reduce our impact on the planet, because running diesel generators is a carbon-emitting activity. So we've started a whole campaign around that in a program called Green Power for Mobile. And the goal of that program is to really help the industry cross the threshold of using renewable energy as the default choice by 2012.
But of course, it's a two-sided argument. On the one hand, ICT is a contributor to energy and CO2 emissions, but on the other hand, ICT can also help other industries reduce their own emissions.
We need to talk about ICT and how that can be applied in a smart way to other sectors. And really the role, governments, policymakers, they will not be able to reach really aggressive carbon reduction targets without thinking in a different way. It requires really a whole mindset, a whole infrastructural change. We need to do things smarter, more efficiently, and this is where technology can really play a key role.
The role that technology plays in connecting people and connecting businesses actually helps those businesses in other ways that lead to more sustainable utilization of resources. Examples might be, because of the network infrastructure that's in place, businesses can have their people communicate and collaborate with less travel. They're not having to consume jet fuel to fly to meetings. They can do that over video teleconferencing. They're allowing people to perhaps work from home and collaborate using these technologies. Now, what enables that? Well, it's the network.
Studies have shown that governments and enterprises are leading the way by insisting on green as a vendor selection criteria. Now is the time to separate the hype from the reality.
Estimates vary considerably on the direct impact of ICTs, between 2 to 3.5% of total greenhouse gas emissions, and also on the impact that the application of ICTs can have in other industry sectors, such as transportation, buildings, energy generation, waste management, on the reduction in total greenhouse gas emissions. And that varies from about 15% to 40%. So when there's such large variations of estimates, you don't get a lot of credibility. So it's very important for the industry to have an internationally agreed standardized methodology. And that's what we now have. The focus group concluded its work last week with a recommendation on a standardized methodology. And we will be taking that forward into the formal process of adopting it as an ITU standard.
We need to act sooner rather than later in order to address this crisis. We are now able to monitor, for those who wish to do so, energy use and energy waste, environmental life signs of the planet, and get the information that we need to make real-time adjustments to eliminate energy waste, to make our buildings, our devices, our transportation systems, and everything we do far more efficient. And again, when you cut out the waste and inefficiency, that reduces pollution, reduces energy, reduces costs. So the old alleged conflict between the economy and the environment is mostly a myth. And back to that common thread for a moment, the solutions to the economic crisis are the same solutions to the climate crisis.